The Four Nations face-off has led all to this: Canada versus Team USA. It's not the final yet, but it's as close as we're getting for now on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, it is the night before the big Chimichanga. It is the game that all of us, I would say, have been waiting for. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern, USA, Canada. It is a clash of titans. And really, for a tournament that's very short-lived and that has really blown by, the Four Nations hype, I would say, has been through the roof. The first game, Canada-Sweden, had 1 million viewers. USA-Finland had 1.5 million viewers. This basically smokes the World Cup of Hockey out of the water. This is like a really friggin' big deal. And it's been one of the most watched hockey tournaments that ESPN and Disney have had ever since the merger and acquisition. So this is a really big deal. And I think this game in particular sets up to be one of the most exciting that we've seen in a very long time. We haven't had best-on-best hockey. And with all of the context and scenario around, what's been happening in world affairs and stuff, this game feels like it's taken on a new significance. Now, stripping out all of that, this is just going to be a clash of titans. These two teams have been tournament favorites, and this game has a huge impact on who might be advancing if either one of these squads wins in regulation. Now, the U.S. is currently in pretty good position to come through and advance to the final. But, of course, Canada only won in overtime against Sweden, and so their position is a little more tenuous, especially if they don't come away with a regulation victory. If they do win in regulation, though, they've stamped their ticket to the next round, which, of course, I'm sure they're going to be thrilled with. But, for Team USA, this is a chance to really put Canada on the back burner and maybe get them into a very desperate state in their final matchup against Finland, which, Finland is maybe reeling and looking for a bit of a spark, but for a short 3-game or 4 odd game tournament here heading up into the finals, it's been a blast. And I think USA Canada threatens to be a fantastic time. Now, Team USA made a couple of big changes in their last game, chief among them being the Tkachuks on the Eichel line. This is a big, beefy, brawny, skilled unit, and it really ran the ice against Team Finland. There was no response from the Finns. I kind of wonder what's going to happen against Team Canada. While the Finnish forwards are good, they don't have the speed and high-end elite ability up and down the lineup like Canada does. Barkov and guys like that can certainly play at Team Canada's level, but the rest of the roster is maybe a little bit more questionable, right? Lekkonen's like not getting in on that roster and team. So for the U.S., I think this is a much harder challenge. This is going to be a very different game, and if we're talking about a team that can speed and pressure the way that Finland did for the first 20 minutes, but make that for a full 60 minutes, Team Canada is probably your best bet. Their roster, quite frankly, matched up against this Team USA team, it's got a pretty nice advantage. Now, second line for Team USA will be Gensel, Matthews, and Hughes. Matthews and Hughes looked pretty good in the last game. We'll be curious to see if they step up big time against a really, beefy, brawny, skilled Canada squad. I mean, again, you're going up against the Mark Stones, McDavids. It's going to be tough. McKinnon had a great look too. I mean, he's been on fire this tournament, just kind of skating at will. And sure, he might not have really been scoring much yet, but I don't think it'll be long before he does find the back of the net. Third line, Boldy, Miller, and Larkin are going to have their work cut out for them. They're going to have to be a forechecking presence against a Canadian squad that will absolutely equal them with guys like Point and Cirelli. So Man, that's going to be a titanic clash of depth lines. And then Connor, Trocheck, and Nelson together. Connor and Nelson may be an interesting thing to think about for the future. Nelson's not playing at center, but he is playing with Connor. So, hey, you know, not saying it's a little bit of a teaser for the future, but maybe kind of like Morrissey and Pareko could be a preview of things to come. Perhaps Nelson and Connor together is a coming attractions preview. I'm mostly joking, but you never know. Now, for the Team USA defense, I wasn't really impressed with how it handled the previous game. At least at the start, it did kind of even out towards the end of the game, and they don't really seem to be making any changes there. Werenski and McAvoy on the first, Slave and Faber on your second, and Hannafin and Fox on your third. I think Faber maybe got a little bit of a bump up, but otherwise nothing too exciting here. Hellebuck has to be the starter for this game. Really don't see any other reason to expect otherwise. And for Canada, that one's going to be a little interesting. I think Binnington is currently slated to start, but I do wonder what's going to happen with him. Now, for Canada, they've got the absolute horses to just smoke almost anyone. Up front, you've got Reinhart, McDavid, and Marner. Then the second line, of course, Crosby, McKinnon, and Stone. They did some rejiggering here. Crosby and McKinnon, those guys together with Stone have to be just unholy terrors. I mean, Crosby just still has it, man. He has been so much fun to watch in those first games of this tournament, and I can't wait to see him against Team USA and really see that elite franchise-level talent that he still possesses. Third line, Hagel, Sorelli, and Point. That is a great forechecking unit. Tampa Bay boys all hanging out together. Going to be a lot of energy, a lot of speed, and Cooper knows these guys, right? This is his, part of his core of his Tampa Bay Lightning offense. So why not bring them along into the game and bring them into the fray? Now, on the fourth line, there's actually a new player joining. Marchand, Bennett, and Jarvis are together, and Bennett's drawing in for Konechny. I would imagine that Bennett is probably to answer the Tkachuk boys because, they're a physical, rowdy bunch. They're going to throw their weight around, and Team Canada is going to want to make sure that they have their guys, not necessarily being the most physical group of this tournament, but enough to be a pest, right? And a fourth line of like Marchand, Bennett, and Jarvis will be hard in the corners. There'll be a pain on the forecheck, and I would imagine Canada kind of wants a little bit of a harder edge with this bottom six against a Team USA team that's got a fair amount of grit married to that skill. Now on the defense, there's an interesting little niggle. Right now we've got Taves and potentially not Makar on the first pairing. Now Makar is expected to play. They are sort of confident that he's going to be over his illness by tomorrow, but if not, if things are really bad, Thomas Harley has been summoned. He could potentially draw in for Makar if, Cale is not up to speed, but Cooper said he basically expects Makar to draw in, so wouldn't worry about that too much. Second pairing, Morrissey and Pareko, you still got them. Third pairing, it seems like Sanheim and Doughty might be paired together with Theodore out. Obviously, Shea is a huge loss, and that's actually going to impact, Vegas's playoff run as well. He's not expected back until around then, which I know everyone's like, oh gosh, here goes Vegas doing their LTIR thing again. But having had my own wrist shattered, I can tell you a broken wrist is absolutely nothing to sniff at, and they will want him to get healthy over time. So sucks for him to be out in the first game, but hopefully his wrist heals up rather quickly. In net, I would assume it's going to be Binnington unless there's a really big surprise. Hill, I wouldn't really ask to be, the number one. But, after Binnington's overtime performance last game, wouldn't think that they would change that. But I think this game is going to end in overtime. I would be a little bit surprised if it's a regulation sort of thing. I guess the big question for me is, will Canada run through Team USA with speed, or will the U.S. kind of did what Sweden did and sort of force Canada to play a slower game? Canada, I thought, willingly adapted to that pace the last time, and that was a very clear mistake. Sweden hung around long enough to make it a problem, and the U.S. has enough talent to actually capitalize on that and end it in regulation if Canada does not overwhelm them first. So my prediction for this game, I would say 5-4 Canada in overtime. But curious to know what you think. Drop your predictions and scores below. We're at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, this game isn't the only one that's going to decide Canada's potential fate. Finland and Sweden actually have a game earlier in the afternoon that could really change how this whole standings landscape looks. That's the price of not, winning in regulation against Team Sweden. Canada now has to rely a little bit on Finland to give them a bit of a helping hand. We'll chat about Finland and Sweden and their lineups in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off and want to maybe bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can do so. You can pick your points favorites, maybe the number of free throws made by your favorite player, who you think is going to win. I know the Luka Doncic trade has really been dominating headlines. Maybe you want to predict how he's going to have in his, upcoming Lakers games. You want to put some money down on a big night from Luka. This is a great opportunity to do so. And if you're looking for an even bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet as well. It's just icing on the cake, right? If you want to join, visit FanDuel.com right now. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, and if the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about one of the last big stages of the Four Nations tournaments, Four Nations face-off before we start to get to the final game. Obviously, it's been an interesting first couple of games. Canada survived a thriller against Sweden. The USA basically blew through Finland. And now it sets up a very interesting scenario where Canada needs to win in regulation and probably needs Finland to win in regulation as well. This could be a really pivotal afternoon game before the big marquee matchup, before or with USA and Canada. Finland and Sweden, I know, may not be the sexiest names, at least for some of our viewers, but for a lot of folks, we all know that Finland and Sweden have a historically fantastic rivalry. I think this game is going to be a very chess matchy kind of thing. Finland probably knows that it doesn't have much of a chance of advancing at this point. It would take something, an act of divine help to pull through. They can start, though, by winning against Sweden, which is going to be tricky. Both of these teams, I think, are looking to play a low event style. In Finland's game against the U.S., their first 20 minutes, I think the plan was to try and pressure the U.S., score a couple of early goals before Hellebuck settles in, and then try and defend the lead, because the forwards were doing a really good job of covering for the defense, but it wasn't really enough, right? The biggest thing is that you can't give the U.S. power plays, and you can't be reckless with your puck control. Unfortunately for Finland, in that game, they were. Sweden does not quite have the horses to make as much of a meal out of anything Finland does wrong, quite the same way that Team USA does. And so I feel like these two teams are going to set up to be fairly conservative. Up front, I don't really expect too many changes for Finland. They've still got Lehkonen, Barkov, and Rantanen on your first, Hintz, Aho, and Laine on the second, Luosterainen, Lundell, and Grenland on the third, and then Teravainen, Haula, and Armia on the fourth. Laine, I kind of wonder if he maybe moves down the lineup at some point. He hasn't really looked at the races. That's probably why he's been on the fourth line with Montreal. At this point, I kind of wonder how much of an NHL career he's got left. I feel like the injuries and everything have just really taken a lot out of him. And, you never want to count a guy out, especially somebody who's got such an amazing shot the way Laine does. But I kind of wonder how much more runway he's got. With Team Finland, his first game, he just really didn't seem to have any sort of gas. And, at this stage of his career, I wonder if he goes, elsewhere, or maybe just steps away from the NHL. He's made a fair bit of money. Things really haven't gone that well for him. If he retires now, I don't think anyone would blame him. He can focus on his mental health, spend time with his spouse, and I think that could be, a nice thing. It's a shame that it's kind of come to this, and a part of me still wants to see him come back to Winnipeg in some capacity. Not on the current contract, mind you. Maybe if they end up terminating his deal and he becomes a free agent, it would be cool to see him back in Winnipeg. But on defense, that's where even bigger issues are hiding. You've got Mikkola and Lundell on your first pairing, Mata and Jokiharju on the second, and Vakanainen and Matanpalo on your third. I know that they maybe looked okay for part of the game. I just don't think that this is a blue line that's going to be able to support the forwards offensively the way that you're going to need them to. Now, Team Sweden not having a lot of speed, I think, is a huge blessing. This game, I think, is going to be a lot closer than the first couple of games. Now, the Sweden game against Canada was a little fluky. I'm not going to rely too much on that as a big indicator of how Sweden's going to do. I think that this feels one of those really low event games. There is an interesting change. Finland is changing the goalie. Saros has been benched in favor of Lankinen, which is, interesting, I guess. I don't really think that was the problem with the last game. I don't think Saros was great in the third period, but I don't think that he was responsible for not scoring goals. So, will be interesting, right? Lankinen, I think, is certainly a capable number 2, especially on this team. But like Saros, unless the offense and the blue line can start getting more, offense actually going, I don't really see that being forsberg to make a difference. Sweden, for their part, I don't really expect too many changes from them either. Raquel, Zibanejad, and Nylander are on the first. Forsberg, Pettersson, and Kempe are on the second. Bratt, Eriksson, Ek, and Raymond are on the third, and Arvidsson, Lindholm, and Nyquist are on the fourth. I'd like to see a little more Bratt and Raymond together. I think that line had really interesting success. Zibanejad, quite frankly, should be demoted. I've just not really been impressed with him. I can kind of see why Rangers fans have not been thrilled with him this year either. He just doesn't look at the races. Very slow. I think, the lack of puck handling ability, it kind of reminds me a little bit of what happened to Wheeler in his 30s. Blake started to not really be able to control the puck as cleanly as he used to, and Zibanejad just doesn't have the speed to compensate anymore. So a little bit unfortunate, but, it is what it is. I kind of feel like Sweden's offense matches up pretty well against Team Finland, but I think the center depth is where Finland's going to have a bigger advantage. Zibanejad and Pettersson are not quite on the same tier of a Barkov and Aho pairing. So, Pettersson could be. Zibanejad, no, not so much. So, will be an interesting chess match here. On defense, the Swedish defense is obviously a lot better. Hedman and Brodin on your first, Ekholm and Carlson on the second, and Forsling and Dahlin on the third. That's a pretty top unit, pretty darn elite, and, compared to what Finland is bringing in, which is basically the equivalent of, half of an AHL defense, this is like worlds apart. So, in net, we are probably going to see Gustafsson unless Ullmark for some reason gets the call. Really, you can't go wrong with either option, but I would trust that Gustafsson is going to be the guy. I thought he was really good against Team Canada. He made some fabulous saves. Everyone remembers the Devon Taves save. That one really should have ended the game in regulation for Canada, but it did not. And so here we are where this result actually could really impact what happens with Canada's chances of advancing to the finals. So really a dramatic day of hockey coming up. The Four Nations face-off, I feel like, has been a smash success. And what I think has really worked for it, aside from everyone really starving for international hockey, is that you've also had a very short tournament. The form factor of basically being like 4 or 5 days of a couple of games apiece at most, and, basically each nation playing like 3 total to decide who goes to the final. I like that setup. It's quick, it's fast, it's something that doesn't overstay its welcome, and it gives real weight and stakes to each and every outing, right? Every game can significantly alter who ends up at the top of the standings. And because they're using a 3-point system rather than a 2-point, it actually holds really significant weight if you don't win in regulation. So this tournament, I think, in the setup and the execution has been just about perfect. It's been a ton of fun. I cannot wait for tomorrow's game. I think, Canada-USA has the potential to be one of the most exciting games that we see in the entire calendar year, and maybe in the really past few years. I don't know that we've had something outside of like Cup finals that feels like it carries this kind of weight. Been a long time as a teaser for, Olympics hockey in a couple of years. This is fantastic. I think we are all really hyped to see where it goes. And, now that this tournament's going to be coming back every 2 years, fans, I think, really have something cool to look forward to. The All-Star game has really been not great, and I have not watched it in years, to be honest. So This actually is something I want to watch. And I really don't find myself saying that about many things that are not Jets related when it comes to hockey. There are not many hockey games that I'm watching that don't directly involve Winnipeg. So congrats to the NHL on cracking this one because this tournament has been a smash success. Sweden-Finland tomorrow to start us off as a fantastic appetizer, and the main meal of Canada-USA should be an absolute wallop. Now, I mentioned Brock Nelson earlier, a little bit facetiously. There is kind of something that I've thought about, and it came up from a trade proposal that somebody posted today, I think from Frank Saravalli. I want to chat about his particular package and, discuss whether it makes sense to pursue this option, especially for the suggested price tag, or if the Jets really should be all in on term. We'll get to that in just a brief moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just finishing up chatting about some takeaways and previews ahead of our couple of big games. Four Nations face-off, really getting to the end game now, so to speak, and we're all excited for it. I think everyone can't wait to watch USA versus Canada. I expect viewership ratings to be absolutely bonkers for this game. Maybe a lot of non-hockey fans might be watching too. So the ESPN network really has a really big job not to screw this up, which sometimes has been a little bit tricky. But earlier I was kind of half joking about Connor and Nelson playing together on the fourth line and perhaps being a preview of things to come for the Jets. Well, there was a proposal from, again, I'm pretty sure it was Frank Saravalli, if I recall correctly. The package was about Nelson, right? And it's just Nelson coming from the Islanders. And the Jets would be proposed to send back a first, a third, and Kupari. And this would give you 50% retention on Nelson. This package, and I think the price for it is just about on target for Nelson. Brock at this point is a really good second line center with some real offensive chops. His defensive game has started to slip, to be honest. And I think overall his speed and perhaps the scoring rates have definitely taken a dip this year compared to previous seasons. And it is a little bit of a continuing trend. He is, 32 now. He's getting older. He's slowing down. But I still think that he's got enough in the tank to be a really savvy, skilled player, right? I don't know that he'll necessarily be the kind of player that Stastny was. Stastny was still putting up pretty elite numbers the way that Ryan O'Reilly is. And so for the Jets, I don't know if that's really something that they're as worried about because, Nelson will be pretty insulated here with the Jets. And I think Winnipeg really just wants that extra scoring beef that can skate well. And that's pretty much what Nelson delivers. You don't really have to worry about that. He's pretty fast. He skates well. He's got a lethal shot. And he played a pretty sound game for Team USA yesterday. So, this could be an interesting one. But the package price, I think, is very reasonable, right? A first, a third, you don't really care about. It's a late first. And Kupari, I mean, he's fun, but I think a lot of people maybe sell him as a much better player than what he is. He's a fine fourth line center, and I think he's come a long way from last season. But I also wouldn't say that Kupari is a guy that the Jets are going to die without. I like his speed. I think he's a very solid bottom six player, and I think he can play some really versatile roles. And he really has improved his game significantly, but he's not going to be the kind of guy that drops a 30 goal, maybe 30 assist type of season for you. And Nelson won't have the time to do that, in a full year, but he'll be a really valuable piece heading into the playoffs. And so for the Jets, the package makes perfect sense. It actually strikes me as a little on the low side for Winnipeg's end, just because I feel like the draft picks are kind of modest. For the rental price, it's normal. But when you're also talking about 50% retention and Kupari not really being more than a depth player, I'm a little bit surprised that there wasn't a bigger prospect thrown in. So if that's the price and that's the rental, it seems like a pretty fine deal to me. The thing that I kind of pause with is that, the Jets have sort of been poking around McCann, perhaps. Maybe they've poked around Ryan O'Reilly too. We don't really know who they've been asking about because if there's one thing the Jets do very well, it's really not tip their hand. They've only done it a couple of times like they did last year with the Monahan thing. But otherwise, you don't often hear them being linked to players that they actually trade for until very late. It's usually a pretty late surprise. It pops up at the last second, and the Jets swoop in. So for me, I don't know that Nelson is actually going to be the main target of focus. If the Jets can find somebody with about 2 years left, I think that that's probably the most ideal scenario, right? You want another 2 contract years after this season to really make the most of what remains of this core. You've still got most of it together for another year or so. After that, things get a little bit more complicated. And that's kind of where I wonder if maybe they also look at a guy like Tommy Novak, who's got another year left. Maybe they're looking for some middle tier players, not maybe the elite top line center, but maybe they want to bring in like 2 to 3 middle six/top 4 players who can fill, maybe more depth roles, but provide enough of a jump to be a needle mover, right? You're really raising the floor for this team. And Novak is the kind of guy who I think actually raises the ceiling a little more than just your average middle six players. So I think the Jets have a lot of options there. If they can find a way to get McCann to come to Winnipeg, that's really an ideal scenario. And I think you can bring in Alexiak too at perhaps a more reasonable price. With all of that said, assuming the Jets want some flexibility, well, they could take a chance and go for 1 year with just this run with Nelson. But I don't know. I feel like Winnipeg is very aware of where it sits in the grand scheme of, a rising cap going forward, a small market team that has all of its star players currently under market value and, only has a couple of those core key stars locked up for the foreseeable future. So I think there's a lot of urgency to get something done. I think that there is a feeling like this is and really has to be their big shot, their big swing for a home run hit. And with Hellebuck not really showing signs of slowing down this year, this feels like a season where you want to go for it all. Vegas with Theodore out's going to do something big. You have to think Colorado is probably thinking about making another trade. You just can't sit idly by and go for, what seems to be modestly available. I think the Jets have something special in store. I don't know what it is, but I think, Nelson would be a very good backup plan. I don't think he's my plan A right now. So we'll have to see what happens. I think the next couple of weeks are going to see some really intense trade discussions start taking place. I'm sure Winnipeg is working the phones very aggressively during this break right now. I'm sure Chevy would like to get a little bit of an earlier jump start. He's got the cap space to make those moves ahead of other teams. And, he is paying very close attention to who kind of sits on that borderline of a playoff spot and who might be dropping out over the next couple of games. So very exciting times for the Jets. A lot of opportunity. Fair bit of risk, but I think that's where you tend to thrive the most. And so for the Jets, let's just hope that whatever choice they make, it works out, right? Whether they bring in Nelson or they go for somebody with term, I just want them to do well and really help the Jets bring in a deep run. We've all been waiting for Winnipeg's playoff success to really start, coming back to us. We haven't had that in a long time. We haven't really seen the Jets out of the first round in a couple of years, and that just frankly sucks. We keep losing to teams that end up in the Stanley Cup Finals, and that doesn't really feel great. Now it's time for the Jets to be the team in that Cup Final. So let me know what you think about the Nelson option. Is that the one you want to prefer, or is there another trade package that you're thinking of? Drop your thoughts and trade predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week with more Jets coverage and hopefully a big, fun weekend of reporting from the Four Nations tournament. But like I said, that's all the time that we've got. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.